All right, guys, good morning.
Where'd you go?
Welcome to Miller Park Zoo Live Chat. Keeper Eric and Keeper Grace, the dynamic duo. I'm Robin to her Batman.
Yes.
Everybody wants to be Batman, let's face it. We're talking about meerkats today. So we've got two meerkats here. You were looking at the female until she left. They've got all sorts of places they can hide. In here, logs. That's a fake termite mound I built many years ago. It's got a PVC tube through the bottom that they can go hang out in, which is generally a nice thing until we want to catch them for some reason. Then they go hide in there and we can't reach them. There's a couple logs they can hide in. They would normally live underground in Africa, where they're from. So unfortunately, this exhibit has a concrete bottom, so they can't dig holes and live underground. We could give them pipes to live in, but that would just cause a problem. That if they never wanted to come out, we'd never see them. So they've got just a couple of places to hide. Meerkats are social animals. They do live in big groups out in the wild, and those groups are called mobs. They're not angry mobs. They're generally peaceful mobs. But those mobs will fight one another. They're very territorial. So right now we have two meerkats. They're a brother-sister pair. And if we wanted to bring in other meerkats, it would be extremely difficult because they would fight so much amongst each other. And sometimes it's fairly simple. You fight for a couple days and then everybody accepts each other, and sometimes animals can hurt really bad and have to be separated out, and then you have to start all over. So it's not easy to bring in new meerkats. That's why we have these two. They keep moving on me.
They do keep moving on me. Active little guys.
They are. They're kind of curious as to what we're doing here. They don't mind if people watch them, but the fact that we're standing here and Grace has her phone out and is following their every move, it's kind of creeping them out a little bit. Maybe to take their mind off of this, I'm going to go in and give them a box. So this is just a box. And we took all the tape off so they don't accidentally eat any tape or anything. And this is just something they can climb around in, they can climb on, they can explore. So let me run in and put this in, and they'll hopefully explore the box, and then I'll come back out and we'll talk some more. Grace can answer any questions you have.
Yeah. Shoot any meerkat questions you have. All right, Danielle, age 5, would like to know how old they are and how long they live.
Okay, these two are going to be 14 years old in August, and that's fairly old. It's not the top of their lifespan here at the zoo. At the zoo, they'll probably get to maybe 18, maybe a little while later. Our last couple meerkats made it to, I think, about 17 before they got pretty sick and passed away, got cancer and things like that. Of course, in the wild, they're not going to live anywhere near that long. It's a hard life. They live out in the desert. There's not a lot of food. There's a lot of predators. So the minute you lose a step, the minute you have a tooth problem that prevents you from eating well, you're done for. So in the wild, I'm not quite sure, but probably more like 10 tops if you're lucky.
Charlie, age 6, would like to know what their favorite food is.
What their favorite food is? They like almost anything. They are omnivores. So we feed them a little bit of meat and some fruits and vegetables here at the zoo. But I think their favorite food is insects, just like Timon from The Lion King. They don't live in the rainforest like Timon did. He was kind of a weird meerkat in that respect, but they do love bugs. And so we feed them a lot of crickets, which is fun because they have to chase the crickets down. We feed them mealworms and waxworms and earthworms, and they love those. Another thing they love is eggs, just a raw egg. They'd eat a hard-boiled egg too, but
Look at her, she's like, eggs? Yes, please.
no eggs at the moment.
Well, that kind of answered my mom's question too. How long, or what do they eat in the wild as well?
Right. In the wild, they eat a lot of insects. One of the coolest things about meerkats is they will eat scorpions and snakes and things like that. And the parents, meerkats, will catch a scorpion and rip the stinger off so that the babies can learn how to catch a scorpion and kill it without actually getting hurt.
Pam was asking if you saw one of our older videos, we had the turkey in here and she wants to know why they were alarm calling while he was in here.
Okay, so meerkats, remember we said they lived in big mobs and they live out kind of in the desert on the plains. And somebody will always be keeping watch for predators. So those would be hawks or anything from the air, jackals, probably snakes, big snakes, things like that. So somebody's always sitting up watching, and they don't do it quite as much because they're getting older and it's not as big a mob as it used to be. But somebody used to sit on top of that termite mound all the time and look for stuff. And when they would sometimes see a shadow go by, if like an airplane or a hawk would kind of hit the sunlight right and it would kind of reflect on them, they would make that call and go hide. And so I think when like the turkey comes in or something that they don't know, sometimes something as simple as us crawling up on a ladder, they make that call so that everybody knows, even though there's just two of them, that there's something scary going on and that they should pay attention and be prepared to hide or to go and hide. So that turkey, even though it's not going to hurt them, they don't know that. It's just a very large bird that they've probably never seen before. So they just wanted to make that alarm call so nobody was attacked by a turkey.
Well, I guess you kind of answered the next question too, is why do meerkats want to hide so much?
Again, just when you're a small animal and you're active during the day, if you're not paying attention, you're just a sitting duck for any of those predators. So they're just the right size for a hawk or an eagle to come down and swoop down and grab. So they're really, really sensitive to shadows that come over them. Because as soon as they would see a shadow of a large bird, they're going to want to hide just to prepare themselves so they don't get eaten.
How many babies can one female have at a time?
Ooh, I would have to check for sure. This pair was just, these two were twins, so there's only two born. I think they can have up to 3 or 4. And
I think that's right.
I don't think they go much past 4.
Yeah.
But I would have to double check that to be sure.
Charlie was also wondering, do you remember where these meerkats came from?
These two were born here.
Oh, that answers Charlie's other question, is where were their parents?
Their parents have just both gotten old and passed away. These guys are pretty old, and their parents were maybe 3 or 4 years old or so. I think it was about 2-3 years ago that the parents started passing away. And the parents came from, think San Francisco, if I remember right. One or two of the parents came from there. I think we had 3 adults living together when these guys were born, and they came from 2 different zoos, and I'm not quite sure where the other ones came from.
Do you have names for these two? I've seen names.
Yeah, I never gave them names, and then
I thought I heard Rose calling them Phil and Lil at one point.
I think Phil and Claire.
Oh yeah,
like
Phil and
that.
Claire. That's what
I
it is.
think Peter gave them that name, and usually these two, since they're the only 2 left, they're just boy and girl. Hey boy, come here, girl. Just like
He
that.
responded.
Yeah.
He's like, what?
Even a lot of animals that have names, I just call them that. Just like you would call your dog boy.
Yeah. They're assuming that they are fixed, so these 2 don't have babies?
Yes.
Since they're brother and sister.
The male is fixed. Funny story about the parents is the female was on a birth control study, and so she was not supposed to have babies, but I guess they were studying the effectiveness of this birth control. And so one day I went in and she didn't want to get out of the box, the little nesting box that we had in there for them to hang out in. It wasn't specifically for having babies, but she was hanging out in there. And when she did come out, she came out and bit me, which alerted me that there was something wrong, because usually they don't just come out and bite. And when I lifted the lid up, there were 2 babies. So we found out exactly how long that birth control lasts before it wears off.
How do you tell these 2 apart?
How do I tell them apart? Good question. One is the male is bigger. He weighs more than the other one. He's in that
we
back
can't see
corner.
either of them. There we are.
Yeah, and it's hard to say. It's hard to say one's bigger and one's smaller when they're
not standing
right
next to each other.
Yeah. The male has smaller ears. So that's the male at the back side of the box.
Yeah.
And then the female is right to the left of the box. And so he's got smaller ears. Now that you see him kind of together, you can see he's a little chunkier. She's a little slimmer, and her ears, I don't know, his ears have
her
always
ears
been
stick
kinda
out.
small.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if somebody chewed on him when he was little or they just were formed that way, but that's how I tell them apart now. It was hard when we had 5 and they all looked pretty similar. It was hard to tell who was who, but now that we're down to 2, it's a little easier.
Well, that's all the questions I have on here so far, unless you have any other fun facts about them.
Fun facts about meerkats. Let's see, what do we know about meerkats? Yeah, so they are more of like a desert animal. And so they don't need a lot of water. They get a lot of the water they need from their food. And they also don't need a ton of food. If you see a wild meerkat, like if you watch Meerkat Manor, they're pretty skinny animals. And then these guys here, despite the fact that I don't try to feed them a whole lot, are kind of chunky. So I think they're an animal that's built for making the most out of a pretty harsh environment. And so when they get here, they tend to get overweight pretty quick. Do we get a question?
Yes, we
Okay.
have 2 questions. We have, do we have any plans to get any more?
Right now, we've been talking about what we want to do when these 2 pass on. Like I said earlier, it's really hard to introduce new ones. So especially when you have them this old. If we brought in like 3 young ones, it's possible that the young ones could just either immediately kill these 2 because they're older, or maybe shut them out so they didn't get a lot of food and they got beat up. So I think these 2 are probably here until they pass away. And then when they die, probably bring in either some more or some other type of mongoose. So these guys are in the mongoose family. And there's a couple other mongoose that we could get. Dwarf mongoose and like yellow banded mongoose, I think, are sometimes available. And they have very similar social structures, and they're active during the day. So my guess is when these 2 pass on, we will get some more of those. But
Both Matt and Amanda asked about enrichment. Do they need a lot of enrichment, and what types of enrichment do we give them?
they are very curious animals, and these guys are getting older, so they're not as active, but they're generally pretty active animals. So yeah, they do like enrichment a lot. They do take advantage of it. So generally, you can do something simple like throwing in a handful of crickets, and they have to chase the crickets down. Or when you give them an egg, they have to push the egg around, and then they crack it open and eat the yolk and stuff. Other things like that box we put in there, he's just messing with it. He's just moving it around, and that's enrichment. They do like scents, so sometimes you can give them something scented, or give them a mirror and they'll look in the mirror. So they're fairly easy to enrich, and they generally partake in it fairly well.
They're curious animals, so they're generally pretty easy to enrich.
Right. And everybody loves these guys, and they want to ask how they can get one as a pet. And I can guarantee you that you're never going to have one of these as a pet in the United States. They're very, very tightly regulated by Fish and Wildlife.
I was like, don't you have to have a permit for meerkats?
But yeah, so the way it works out is, even as a zoo, you need a permit to hold these animals. And that permit is good only for the exhibits that are approved. And the Fish and Wildlife Service will come in and approve your exhibits. So we can't say, can we move them down to XYZ exhibit in the rainforest? Because Fish and Wildlife would have to come out and inspect that and approve it. Anytime we move these guys, we need to get special permission. And Fish and Wildlife is really strict about these guys, because we don't want them getting out into the environment where they could establish themselves and cause a problem by killing native wildlife. Or
right, wasn't that law created to protect the wild prairie dog population?
It's possible, yeah.
I feel like I heard that someplace.
Yeah, these guys would, if they could establish themselves someplace warm, they could decimate the prairie dogs, which would then displace things like black-footed ferrets,
yeah.
Potentially burrowing owls, and all those other interconnected animals you'd have out there. In some place like Florida, you could, these guys could just take over because there's no cold to keep them in check. Here in Illinois, I think it would probably be too cold generally for them to survive, even underground, because they don't hibernate, so they would run out of food in the winter. But definitely Texas or Florida or Hawaii.
Yeah, they'd be able to establish.
Huge issues.
Have you ever given them mirror enrichment? Mom wants to know if they recognize themselves or they would treat it as another meerkat.
We have given them mirrors before, and they do look in them. I don't think they don't
think they recognize them as themselves.
There's very, very few animals that recognize themselves. Even some of the larger primates, some of the big monkey species, just don't have enough brain power to recognize.
I gave a mirror to the lemurs, and Celeste kept looking behind it.
Yeah, they look behind it to figure out where the rest of the monkey is, or they will threaten it because the monkey's looking at them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of humorous, but it's also kind of stressful sometimes for them to have a quote unquote intruder in their exhibit, even though it's just them. And so, do they recognize it as other meerkats? I've never seen them like fight it. I think they're curious. They're a little bit confused when we give them a mirror.
Amanda's asking how often we change their environment, their sand and their logs and things.
The logs, unfortunately, we don't get a whole lot of great logs like these.
Right, these are good meerkat logs since
they're hollow. They can climb through them. They can climb on top of them. They're big. Sometimes we get a hollow log and it's only like 2 feet long.
Yeah.
So whenever I get something, I try to switch it out, or I try to add it. Their substrate we change out generally every 3 months or so, 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, it gets spot cleaned daily, but then we...
And then during the summer, when we have junior zookeepers doing a lot more enrichment, the substrate gets full of more hay and shavings because we're doing a lot more enrichment where we put stuff like that in. So it tends to get messier quicker. It's probably due for a change now, but We've been kind of busy.
Limited staff.
Yes.
We've been super busy while we've been closed.
So hopefully soon.
All right, last question. My dad wants to know what kind of health issues meerkats have.
I think the main ones that I've seen are like tooth and gum issues. And those are, as long as you catch them early, you can solve them pretty quick. If they've got a rotten tooth, you pull the tooth and stuff like that. We've seen cancer, not much you can do about that. I haven't noticed a lot of like arthritis or anything. Usually it's a pretty quick decline. And these guys, because they're out in the wild and there's limited resources, if somebody gets sick, sometimes they will kick them out of the group. There's no sense. There's no sense trying to feed a sick animal that can barely move itself when you don't have hardly any resources.
Yeah, I forget. So, that was it. I forget what zoo that was. That we had two groups of meerkats because we had an older male that got sick, and then the younger girls kicked him out of the group.
Yeah. So sometimes you're able to keep one or two together, and then the rest of the group. Sometimes. And it's hard because these guys are stuck in this exhibit. We're not allowed to move them anyplace else without permission.
What did she have stuck on the end of her nose? Breakfast?
I think it's just the substrate.
Oh, is it just sand?
It's crushed walnut shells, so when your nose gets wet, you sometimes get a little
She must have been digging in.
walnut shell stuck to it.
All right.
Shall we take care of business?
Yeah, shall we grab the... Oh, my knee.
So we didn't get to it yesterday.
I forgot it.
We were a little busy. So we're giving this away today for everybody who donated through the Facebook donate button last week.
Sally the alligator's foot.
Yep. I think we repeat that.
Well, it's not her actual foot. Yeah, I pulled meat for them.
Here's a name right here. I'm not looking at who it is.
Heather Beeman.
So,
Heather Beeman, if you're watching, message the zoo with your address.
yes, we'll get this in the mail to you. And then for the next week, Grace had the lemurs paint a painting yesterday, and everybody got turned blue.
Everybody, the exhibit was blue.
Grace was
The lemurs
blue.
were blue. I was blue.
Yes. So if you donate through the donate button this week, we'll put your name in a drawing, and then next Sunday, hopefully, we will draw a name for this, and somebody can get to hang this on their wall.
Yeah.
So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Tomorrow, come back, and we'll be talking about pythons.
Yes. We'll be back with the pythons. Thanks, guys.